Hi, welcome to Church for Skeptics. You know, after being on for these many years now, you're bound to come around to the same topics again and again. So I'm kind of going back to the beginning, which is a good word to use because I'm going to talk about the beginning. One of the things I was thinking about was how relevant the scriptures are in relation to so much effort being put into understanding the beginning of our universe by the scientific community. I mean, definitely the scriptures play into this. I'm thinking about Romans 1, where it talks about that the creation demonstrates, makes obvious the Creator. And then, of course, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John's Gospel, chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then even John's epistle, the 1 John, which is one of my favorite letters in the New Testament, where he says, that which was from the beginning. So John really likes that idea of the beginning of the universe, and I'm not sure how much he understood about that scientifically. So as we begin this, I'm going to try to approach this as it's nothing new in one sense, but I'm going to try to say this in a new way, and hopefully it will be a help to you. But first, I'd like to interject a few questions to some of the new atheists, in particular Richard Dawkins, because as I've said before, I think what they are asking us to do on an intellectual basis is to discard so many things about our human experience that we just take for granted as common sense. If naturalism is true, and again, naturalism is the worldview that the universe is all that exists, all that has ever existed, and all that ever will exist. So everything is matter, everything is molecules in motion. And so if that's true, then we really don't have free will. You know, I was thinking the other day, this is great. If you're a naturalist, you just blame everything on the Big Bang. Why did you do that, the Big Bang? You know, why didn't you do this? It's all the Big Bang. Everything's programmed from the Big Bang forward. And that's true if naturalism is true, but surely we know better. Surely we know that there is actually a right and wrong. Surely we know that we have a free will, that we actually make choices, at least within our ability to choose what the choices we have, that we actually have intentionality. I was thinking about Richard Dawkins and the God delusion. It's been out a number of years now, of course. I mean, it made a big impact, and I've thought about asking him this question. Now, I want you to see where this I think puts him in a trap that he doesn't want to be in. So my question would be, I've read the book twice now, Dr. Dawkins. My question to you is, did you intend to write the God delusion, the book? Did you intend to write that, or is it just the product of a blind force of nature, which, if I understand you correctly, you think that's all that exists? So again, blame it on the Big Bang. Is the God delusion ultimately a product of the Big Bang over which you had no control? Or did you intend to write the book? Now, what could his answers be? He could say, yes, I intended to write the book, which is obviously the common sense answer. But then nature is not intentional. So by saying I intended to write the book, he would have to be saying that he's not natural totally, certainly a natural part to all of us, but he would have to be saying there's nothing about me that is natural, or he would have to be saying that nature itself does have intentions. And I don't think he wants to go there either. So just asking him that simple question, did you intend to write the God delusion, or anybody else that writes any book for that matter, it seems to me that it's just a common sense but very logical trap, if you will, where there's just no reasonable answer he can give that stays within his worldview. Okay, park that thought and we'll come back around to it as we make progress. I hope you'll stay with us. Well, back to the beginning then. As I said, if you'll just kind of set that aside, the Richard Dawkins dialogue, what I want to talk about is the universe itself. Where did it come from? As I said, Romans indicates that that's one of the ways, just the existence of the universe and its nature, but not for this program so much. We just want to talk about the existence of the universe, that it points towards a creator. So what I want to discuss today is, where did the universe come from? And it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me there are only three possibilities. And we'll discuss each of them. The first possibility is that the universe popped into existence out of nothing. Now that seems very counterintuitive. It seems impossible. And by the way, I think it is impossible. From nothing, nothing comes. And when I say nothing, I literally mean nothing. But that is an explanation, or maybe it's not. The second choice would be that the universe has just always been here. It didn't come from anything because it's always been here. It's eternal, you might say. And I want to say that same thing in a philosophical way that might be difficult for you to get at first until the lights come on. The universe could be an infinite regress of causes and effects. In other words, there have been causes and effects going on for eternity, let's say. Those are the first two possibilities. The universe popped into existence out of nothing, or the universe is actually eternal or infinite in the past. And by the way, that's what most people thought, scientists included, all the way from Aristotle, who was otherwise a pretty good thinker. He thought the universe was eternal, although he did see intentionality and design in the universe and ascribed them to a creator. But until the 1920s, even scientists thought that, and it really messed with their program to discover evidence that the universe could not have been eternal. But that's an option. Now there's a third option, but I don't want to give it away until the end, because what I want to do is try to make it seem the most reasonable and the most obvious, the most common sense interpretation of where the universe had to come from. You probably know where I'm going with it, so not much point in hiding it. But let's deal with the first one. The first explanation, I'll quote a philosopher. His name is Quentin Smith, and here's what he says. The best explanation is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for no reason. Whew, really? Now the reason he says, think about this, the reason he even uses the term came from, even though his explanation is nothing, the reason he feels compelled to use the term we came from nothing is because he believes that the universe had an actual beginning. He thinks nothing caused the universe to come into existence. It came by nothing, and there's no reason for the universe to come into existence. Now, I think one scientist said the universe is just one of those things that happens every now and then. I have just a 1,000 problems with that. I think it dies the death of 1,000 qualifications. Is that even an explanation? That's my first question. If your explanation for the universe is that it came from nothing, where does that leave science? You know, it's amazing. Science and the ability to do science is phenomenal. And yes, it can be used for good or bad, but think of all the great things that have come to us through scientific endeavor. But if things have no cause at all, that's what he's saying. If you say the universe came from nothing, what you're saying is there is no cause for the universe. Yes, it had a beginning. Nothing caused it. Well, I want to say that nothing, is not an explanation. Neither is it scientific at all. Imagine doing science if things can pop into existence out of nothing for no reason and by nothing. Then what about the scientific laws, the laws of nature, the laws by which we predict causes and effects? All those are out the window if things can pop into the universe from nothing. The father of modern science, Francis Bacon, made the statement that science is the pursuit of causes. So if you say that the cause of the universe is nothing, again, it's not an explanation, and I don't think it's scientific at all. It's self-defeating, actually. Now, let's bring in science. If you bring in science, how do they respond to this? Basically, and I've read a lot of recent articles about this, science doesn't help an awful lot here. When we're talking about the beginning of the universe, the most prevalent answer is give us more time, and which is a reasonable request, by the way, given the excellent record of scientific endeavors, and we'll find the cause. They would say no, they might agree, there's no way that nothing can cause the universe, but if you give us more time, we'll find the cause of the universe itself. Now, let me just kind of finish this thought. So here's why that's as big a problem as Quentin Smith. To say that if you give us more time, we'll find a natural cause for the universe, and this, again, this is coming from the naturalistic worldview. Nature is all that exists. There is nothing else, so you can't draw an explanation from anything else. I want you to see how that is inherently absurd. It's inherently, no matter how good science is, they'll never come up with a natural explanation for nature. Maybe saying it that way helps, because they've just pushed the problem back, and what they've done is fallen into the trap of the second possibility, that is an eternal universe, or an infinite regress of causes and effects. And I want to try to spend more time on that to try to show you why that's impossible. But to say that we're going to find a natural cause for nature itself, that's worse really than saying that the universe came from nothing, because the other absurdity here is nothing is self-caused. We just know that from common sense, from philosophy. If it was self-caused, it would have to exist before it existed. And I hope you understand that's getting a little bit just off the field of reason itself. So we've kind of come to this idea of what caused the universe. Nothing, which presumes it had a beginning, or maybe it didn't have a beginning. And science pitches in here and says, well, give us some time, we'll discover a natural cause for nature itself, which is an absolute impossibility. So what I want to do now is proceed to the second possibility. Maybe, why does nature have to have a beginning? Why does the universe have to have a beginning? Why is it impossible that the universe be eternal? Before I move on to explain why an eternal universe is an impossibility, let me make this comment. It seems to me that if you're a naturalist, you put yourself in a straitjacket intellectually. Once you say that nature is all that exists, the only reasonable possibility you can go to is that the universe is eternal, which we're going to show is an impossibility. You can't explain nature by nature if it had a beginning. There are a lot of just, to me, just really unreasonable things that we're asked to believe. And just kind of parenthetically, before I move on, let me ask Richard Dawkins another question. Now, in his book, he starts out pretty early in the God delusion. Richard Dawkins says, if somebody tells you something that they believe, ask them what evidence they have for it. Okay, so far so good. Then he says, if they don't have any evidence for it, don't believe a word they say. So far so good. I can live with that. We might argue as to what counts for evidence, but I understand what he's saying. Now, in the book, he has a chapter called Why It's Almost Certain That God Doesn't Exist, and he talks about the apparent design of the universe. And he agrees that whether you look through a telescope or a microscope, it looks very much like about everything in the universe was designed for a purpose. And we'll do a program on the whole evidence for intelligent design. But remember, Richard Dawkins himself is saying that there is apparent design everywhere. In biology, DNA looks designed. It looks like it's information. He even calls it information. It looks like the universe is finely tuned to allow for life on this planet. So he says there's apparent design. He wants to keep calling it apparent, but here's my question then. What's the difference between apparent design and evidence for design? Of course, which implies a designer. Now, he's already told us if somebody tells you they believe something and they don't have any evidence for it, don't believe a word they say. Okay, so far so good. Again, tell me, what's the difference between something looking designed very much looking designed, and the evidence for design. He doesn't, I don't see what the difference is. If it looks designed, that's evidence for design. So we do have evidence. If we just look at it, it looks like everything's working perfectly together at a level that is beyond anything we can imagine or produce ourselves. Even Bill Gates talks about the DNA being more complex than any possible computer design could ever be. Computer design, there's the key word. So if you're gonna say that everything looks designed but it can't be designed, don't you need to have an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that it wasn't designed? I mean, evolution or not. Don't you need to have an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence, which is along the lines of what he's asking for? What's the overwhelming evidence then, Dr. Dawkins, that even though the universe looks really designed, it's not designed, it's only apparent? What is your scientific evidence against intelligent design? Strangely enough, there is none, at least not in the God delusion. He has one argument against intelligent design, and it's not scientific, it's philosophical, and it's very flawed philosophy. His only argument against assigning real design to all the apparent design is that it raises the bigger question of who designed the designer. Well, that's a philosophical question, number one. And it's a very flawed philosophical question. It's like saying, who caused God? By definition, as we'll see just as we finish the program today, by definition, God must be eternal. If the universe is not eternal, then whatever caused the universe must be eternal. And so that eternal cause of the universe must be uncaused. There's no designer for God. There's no cause for God. He's not self-caused. We've already talked about that being an impossibility. He's self-existing, and that's what Christian philosophers have said all along. So I just wanted to put that in there before we go to the second possibility here, and the idea that I just think that when you lock yourself into naturalism, it's like you're saying there are no supernatural explanations allowed. You put yourself in a straitjacket. And I've used this illustration before, but I need to use it again. Alvin Plantinga, the great Christian philosopher from Notre Dame, gives this illustration. It's like a drunk who loses his car keys. He's been out partying, he loses his car keys. But he refuses to look for them anywhere except under the street lamp because the light's better there. He can see better there. I think that's a great analogy to the naturalistic straitjacket that I'm talking about. If you absolutely refuse to entertain any supernatural ideas being the cause for the universe, you're going to be stuck with two absurdities. Either the universe began from nothing, which is an absurdity, or it is eternal, which is also an absurdity, and that's where I want to finish up here, kind of. So hopefully you'll get your thinking caps on, and as I try to explain why the universe cannot be eternal, I want you to grasp this. I've been working with some high school students on this, and they did, so I assume you can too. If we've eliminated nothing as a reasonable explanation for the universe, what about an eternal universe that doesn't come from anything? Why is that such an impossibility? And by the way, let me just say that I'm sure you know this, that the vast majority, almost all scientists agree now that the universe had an absolute beginning, that it's not eternal, and they got that from scientific evidence. But it's amazing to me how it took that long. It wasn't until Einstein, early 1900s, and evidence just piling up that the universe had to have an absolute beginning, that the scientists agree, and it upset them when they realized that the universe could not be eternal. Even scientists assumed that for so many years. But there was a great reason well before scientific discoveries proved that the universe, from a scientific standpoint, was not eternal. Let me give you the philosophical reason in a three-point syllogism here. And it's going to sound maybe a little fuzzy at first, and hopefully I'll clear it up for you. Number one, an actually infinitive, or infinite would be better, an actually infinite number of things cannot exist. And we need to just stop there, let that sink in. We can talk about infinity, that we can use infinite numbers in mathematical equations, but an actual number of infinite things, causes and effects, cannot exist. Point number two, an eternal universe with no beginning must entail an actual infinite number of causes and events. In other words, what caused this day, the day before it, what caused that, the day before it. You have to have an infinite number of causes and events, which is an actual impossibility. And I'll give you an illustration to try to explain that. So the third part of the syllogism is, therefore, a universe with no beginning cannot exist. You don't need science to tell you that. Reason tells you that. Now, I'm trying to explain this to high school students, and them and you too probably. We don't normally think in these philosophical terms, and so they're struggling to find this out or to understand this. And then the light bulb went on in one student's mind, and he raised his hand and made this, I thought it was a great statement. He says, I get it. He said, you can finish a race, or you can start a race. Here's what he said: you can start a race that never finishes. That's what we've done. But you cannot finish a race, come to this point in time, that never had a beginning. You can't finish a race that never started. I'll try to say it another way. And I've done this with the students. I said, look, try to count to 100 starting nowhere. Don't start. Remember, if an eternal universe has no starting point, don't start, but count to 100. Well, you can't do it, of course. Mathematicians have tried to illustrate this with some pretty interesting analogies and some interesting stories. One mathematician named David Hilbert came up with the illustration of Hilbert's Hotel. And hopefully this will understand. What ends up happening is, when you try to actualize infinity, you come up with absurdities. It just doesn't work. It kind of blows your mind, so to speak. So David Hilbert came up with this idea of Hilbert's Hotel. Hilbert's Hotel has an infinite number of rooms. They never run out of rooms, an infinite number. Now remember, you can't really actualize this. And they're all full. So you've got an infinite number of guests in an infinite number of rooms. Then all of a sudden, 1 million new guests show up at the desk asking for a room. What can you do? Well, no problem. You've got an infinite number of rooms. So you just take these 1 million new guests and move everybody an infinite number up, one, because you never run out. There's no limits here. And then you put the new 1 million guests in there, and you still have an infinite number of rooms with an infinite number of guests, and all the rooms are full, and yet you have 1 million more guests than you had before they arrived. You say, you got to stop, there's smoke coming out of my ears here, I can't grasp this. Well, of course you can't grasp it, because it's an impossibility. It's a mathematical absurdity. To simplify it even more, what if I have what if I have an infinite number of marbles and I give you half? How many marbles then do each of us have? Well, we still both have an infinite number of marbles. Well, you say that's absurd. Yes, it is. That's my point. So how many days does it take to get to this day? Today, when you're watching this program, let's say. Well, you say it takes all of the days before it. Yes, it does. What if there are an infinite number of days before it, and the universe has no beginning and time has no beginning? Well, then we would have never arrived at this day. You understand that? Because there are an infinite number of days before it that you can't actualize. So now we've got two possibilities that are both impossibilities. Did the universe that we know has a beginning, did it come from nothing? Everything that's natural can't be explained by something natural. Or is it an infinite number of causes and effect that just never stops going backwards, just as it never will stop going forward? You can't have that. It doesn't work. You can start a race that you never finish, but you can't finish a race that never got started. Well, if those two things are impossible, and I just want to say common sense tells us that they are, what's the third possibility? If the universe, if it's not reasonable, and to my thinking it's just not reasonable to think that the universe came from nothing, if it's not reasonable to think that the universe is eternal from both a philosophical and a scientific standpoint, what's our third alternative? There's only one thing left, and that's supernatural. That's a scary word for people, I guess, because they start thinking superstitious, animism and nature gods and all that thing, supernatural. But really all it means is something outside of nature. Well, if nature has a beginning and it can't cause itself, then the only alternative is that it was caused by something outside of itself, supernatural that is, and that something has to be eternal. And we haven't gotten all the way to the God of the Bible yet, but I would go so far as to say this: there aren't very many religions that are compatible with good philosophy and science today, but Christianity is certainly one of the few, because it proscribes an eternal God who is outside of nature, who is the cause for the beginning of time and space and matter, which we call the universe. Why is that not a reasonable explanation? That's what I want to know. Especially, let's go back to the questions we asked Richard Dawkins, especially the second one. Why is that not a reasonable explanation, especially when you've got so much evidence in the universe, apparent evidence for apparent design in the universe? Why not just make the best inference, which means the best reasonable explanation, and say that the universe looks designed because it is designed, and we know philosophically that it had to be caused, created by something outside of itself, outside of time, something supernatural that has no beginning. So when Richard Dawkins says that's a big problem because who caused God, who designed the designer, that's my point. Philosophically, you must have a first cause that is eternal, or you're back to the impossibility of that infinite regress. You see that? I hope you see that. You can't have it both ways. You've got to have an eternal first cause to replace the impossibility of nothing, and to replace the impossibility of an eternal and infinite regress of causes and events. You can't actualize infinity. I just think, at the very least, I want to say, why is that not reasonable? Why is that not the best, given what the alternatives are? Richard Dawkins, in The God Delusion, he wants to posit a beginning of life theory, but really there's no good answer scientifically for the beginning of life. The odds of that are just too great. And he agrees that the simplest life of all has more information in it than, he says, 1,000 Encyclopedia Britannicas. That's just, it's beyond the realm of chance. Surely we can just say, at least it's reasonable to believe in a first intelligent cause for a designed universe. And boy, we get the farm back if that's true. We get intentionality back. We can actually do things on purpose. We get morality back. Things are actually right and wrong, not because we say so or not because we're trying to survive, but because they actually are. And we get purpose and meaning back to the universe. We're here for a reason, for a purpose. Let me close with this verse out of 1 John that I actually taught in the church this morning. John says, that which was from the beginning, that which we have seen, and he's talking about Jesus now, Jesus being eternal, but he came to this earth to reveal the nature of God. He says, that which we have seen and heard and touched and our hands have handled. And then he says, the word of life. Word is the word logos. It's the Greek word for inherent truth, that which is true, logic, reason, purpose. And he says, the word of life. He's saying we've seen the purpose, the truth of life, and we're sharing that with you. When I was an atheist, I missed having a purpose for life. When I found Jesus, or he found me, I found that purpose. It's in the relationships that we have, as John says, with God the Father, God the Son, and each other. There is a reason for this universe to exist and for you and I. I hope if you don't have that, you will think about these things and get it back. Thanks for watching.